The blades of the helicopter sliced through the air with a deafening roar, the desert stretching endlessly below, painted gold by the setting sun. Inside, a group of young recruits laughed, their voices echoing against the metal walls. They thought this was funny, thought they were tough. But their laughter was hollow, built on cruelty and ignorance. And at the center of it all sat Sergeant Alyssa Kane, a U.S. Army Ranger, quiet, composed, and far too calm for someone surrounded by wolves. Kane had been their instructor for only a week, and already they hated her. Not because she was harsh, but because she was unbreakable. She didn't yell, didn't flinch, didn't rise to their taunts. She just did her job, better than anyone else. Her calm was their frustration, and frustration quickly turned into something darker. The mission that day was a routine altitude training drill, a helicopter ride followed by a simulated jump. But when the chopper hit 6,000 feet, one of the recruits, a tall, cocky kid named Briggs, smirked and said, "Hey Sarge, think you'd survive without a chute?" It was supposed to be a joke. But jokes turn deadly fast when fear and ego mix. Before anyone could process, another recruit gave her a shove, and Alyssa Kane was out the door. For a moment, the recruits froze. Then the reality hit them like a gut punch. They had just thrown a U.S. Army Ranger out of a moving helicopter without a parachute. "Oh my God, what did we?" one stammered, but Briggs cut him off, his voice trembling. We say she jumped. She was doing a demo. We didn't see anything." The pilot was busy with his controls, unaware of the chaos behind him. The boys sat in stunned silence as the desert wind howled outside. But what none of them saw was that Alyssa Kane wasn't falling helplessly. She was moving. Training took over. The wind screamed past her ears, her eyes locked on the horizon, her breathing steady. At 6,000 feet, you don't have time to think, only to act. Below her, less than a mile away, a ridge jutted out from the canyon floor. She angled her body, twisting, catching air currents like an eagle diving for prey. Every ranger learns to improvise. Every ranger learns to survive. And Alyssa Kane was no ordinary ranger. She was from the 75th Regiment, known for completing impossible missions. She hit the slope hard, rolling through dust and rock, every muscle screaming in protest. Pain ripped through her shoulder, her ribs felt cracked, but she was alive. Alive and furious. By the time the helicopter landed, the recruits had already rehearsed their lie. They told the range officer she jumped, an unauthorized demo. They pretended to panic, fake tears, shaky voices. The officer frowned but said little, ordering an immediate search and rescue. Hours passed. The desert grew cold. And then, as the search team fanned out, the radio crackled. "Command, this is Ranger Kane," came a voice, calm and sharp. "I'm on foot. Heading North Ridge. And you better tell those boys their little joke just declared war." The base erupted in disbelief. "She's alive," someone whispered. But the recruits went pale. Because they knew what that meant. Alyssa Kane was coming. The next morning, before sunrise, the camp was silent. A thin mist hung over the sand. The recruits huddled in the mess tent, whispering nervously. Suddenly, the flap burst open, and there she was. Covered in dust, uniform torn, bruised, but standing tall. Every step she took made the ground seem to tremble. The officer stood at attention, but she didn't look at him. Her eyes locked on the recruits, cold, steady, lethal. "You thought Rangers needed parachutes," she said softly, almost too calm. "We don't. We need discipline. We need loyalty. We need each other. And you failed all three." No one spoke. Her voice carried the weight of every battlefield she'd survived, every comrade she'd buried. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She didn't have to. "You want to be soldiers," she continued. Then understand this: fear doesn't make you strong. Cowardice doesn't make you funny. And throwing someone out of a chopper doesn't make you brave. It makes you a disgrace to the uniform you wear. She turned to the officer. Sir, request permission to run them through Hell Week protocols, personally. The officer hesitated, then nodded. What followed became legend at the training base. For the next 5 days, Kane pushed them to their limits, crawling through mud, running miles with packs twice their weight, holding planks in freezing rivers until their bodies shook uncontrollably. She didn't punish them out of anger, she rebuilt them through suffering. Every bruise, every blister was a lesson. By the end, most of them could barely stand. But something had changed. The arrogance was gone. The laughter had died. What remained were soldiers, humbled, disciplined, and, for the first time, respectful. On the final day, as the sun rose over the horizon, Kane stood before them. Her tone softened for the first time. The army doesn't need heroes, she said quietly. It needs brothers. And when you betray one, you betray us all. Remember that the next time you think about who you're standing beside, because that person might be the one who saves your life. She started to walk away, but Briggs, the same recruit who had mocked her, stepped forward, his voice breaking. Ma'am. I'm sorry. She turned, met his eyes, and for the first time, gave a small nod. Then earn it, she said. The legend of Sergeant Alyssa Kane spread far beyond that desert base. The story of the ranger who fell without a parachute, and walked back to camp, became a warning whispered among new recruits. Don't mess with the quiet ones, they'd say. They've already been to hell, and they know the way back. And somewhere out in the training fields, when the helicopters roar again, and the wind howls across the canyons, every soldier remembers her, the woman they threw from the sky. Who taught them that rangers don't fall? They rise. Fear has a way of revealing who we are when everything else is stripped away. It exposes the weak, humbles the arrogant, and tests the brave. For Sergeant Alyssa Kane, fear was not an enemy, it was an old acquaintance she had learned to dance with through years of combat, missions, and survival. She didn't need a parachute to remind her of her worth or her strength. What she needed was purpose, and purpose is what had kept her alive when the world tried to break her. When those recruits threw her from the helicopter, they didn't just push her into the sky, they pushed themselves into a lesson they would never forget. Kane's fall through that scorching desert air was a silent conversation between her and gravity, a battle of control, precision, and defiance. She had always told her trainees, control the fall, don't let the fall control you, but that day, those words became her reality. Every second in the air was borrowed time, but she used every fragment of it to think, to adjust, to fight for a landing. She knew pain was coming, but pain was familiar, and familiarity was comfort to a soldier who'd seen worse. When her body hit the ridge, the impact was brutal, ribs cracked, dust filled her lungs, vision blurred, but her mind stayed razor sharp. She crawled, she breathed, she survived. That survival wasn't luck. It was training, resilience, and an unshakable willpower that had been forged through years of seeing others fall and learning how to stand again. Every scar on her skin told a story, and this one would just be another chapter. What those boys never understood was that soldiers like Kane were not built in classrooms or barracks. They were molded by hardship, by the sound of bullets cutting through the dark, by nights spent wondering if dawn would ever come. They were shaped by loss, discipline, and an oath that went far beyond pride. When Kane returned, walking across that sand-covered training ground with blood on her uniform and fury in her eyes, she wasn't coming back for revenge, she was coming back to teach. And that's what makes a true leader. Leadership isn't about barking orders or demanding respect, it's about commanding it through example. She could have had them court-martialed. She could have ended their military careers with one report. But she didn't. Because punishment wouldn't fix what was broken inside them, fear, arrogance, and ignorance would simply grow back. So she chose something harder. She chose to rebuild them through pain, the same pain that had once rebuilt her. That week of training became a baptism by fire. Kane stripped them down to the core, not their muscles or uniforms, but their character. She forced them to confront the weakest parts of themselves. Every exercise, every drop of sweat, every silent moment staring into the sunrise became a reminder that strength isn't in how loud you shout, it's in how long you can endure in silence. And by the end, those boys learned something most soldiers never understand until it's too late, that respect is earned not through dominance, but through integrity. What she gave them wasn't just physical endurance. She gave them a mirror. A reflection of the kind of soldier they could be if they stopped pretending and started believing in the uniform they wore. Briggs, the loudest of them all, learned the hardest. His apology wasn't words, it was the way he stood at attention when she entered, the way his posture carried guilt and determination, the way he started leading by example instead of laughter. Kane saw it, and she respected it. Because change, no matter how small, is proof of redemption. The story spread across the base like wildfire, but not as a tale of punishment. It became legend because it spoke to something universal in every soldier, the idea that no matter how far you fall, you can rise higher than before. And for Kane, that legend wasn't about her. It was about the lesson she left behind. That Rangers don't need parachutes because the ground doesn't decide who survives, the heart does. Every time a new recruit heard that story, it wasn't told with fear but with awe. It reminded them that arrogance is the enemy of discipline, and that a true warrior never measures themselves against others, only against their own limits. It reminded them that leadership isn't power, it's sacrifice. Kane walked away from that base weeks later, her injuries healed but her message permanent. The wind followed her boots across the desert, carrying whispers of her name through the dunes. Some said she was fearless, others said she was lucky. But those who truly knew what it meant to be a ranger understood the truth, she wasn't fearless. She was just brave enough to face her fear head-on. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move forward despite it. In life, we all fall from something, sometimes from heights, sometimes from grace, sometimes from the illusions we build around ourselves. But the fall isn't what defines us. What defines us is what we do after we hit the ground. Alyssa Kane didn't just survive the fall. She rose from it, stronger, louder, prouder. And through her rise, she taught others that the uniform you wear is not about the cloth, it's about the conviction. Those recruits went on to serve in missions across the globe, and every time they stepped into a helicopter, they remembered her words. Control the fall. Don't let the fall control you. It became a motto, a mantra whispered under breath before every jump, every mission, every moment of uncertainty. Because sometimes, all it takes is one fall to remind you how powerful the will to rise truly is. In the end, her story wasn't about vengeance, and it wasn't about heroism. It was about transformation. About turning mistakes into lessons, weakness into wisdom, and fear into fire. And long after she was gone, when the desert winds howled and the helicopters thundered across the horizon, every ranger who heard her name knew one thing for certain: Sergeant Alyssa Kane didn't fall from the sky that day. She descended on her own terms, and she came back to prove that real warriors don't fall to their deaths. They fall to rise, and raise hell if they must.